Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker. Joining me, my host companion, Sejohn. I was too funny for my own good, Sejohn. I'm dying of coughing now.
Made yourself laugh there, huh? Laughed so hard you sneezed.
Yeah, bless me. And also with you. Hi, Sejohn. How you doing this fine Sunday morning?
I'm doing pretty good, Dev. I mean, there's, the world is in a state still. For those that are only just tuning in, we are still in the middle of a strike, and therefore there are certain topics and conversations that we're probably not going to have today, if you're curious, because, man, there's some conversations I can't wait for us to eventually have.
You and me both, man. I'd like to talk about one, briefly. Yesterday morning, as I was about to head off for my adventures. I had some adventures yesterday. So, I'm going to try to hang my hat on those adventures, those happy, dappy adventures. I heard the TV news talking about, a particular actor that we're pretty fond of was going to be on to talk about their new project. And both of my parents Dev, you got to come and you got to see this, because how is this possible? And, I'm curious as well. Because if you are a fan of the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe podcast, which I think that just kind of blew the cover I was trying to keep there, we're on hiatus over there. We're not recording new episodes. But, the Today Show is talking about, we're going to have Adam Sandler to talk about his new film on Netflix. And that hurt a little bit to hear that. But, I guess old infotainment tricks die hard is the way that I can put this, because they didn't have him on to discuss it. It was literally just this schmuck, and I call him a schmuck because I don't recognize him as somebody who's usually on Today, reading an article about the new movie that Adam Sandler worked on with Netflix that was completed and in the can before the whole strike really got to where the point that it is right now. But my parents were if he's gonna be on the show, my father, I'll burn it all down. And I'm that's nice, Dad, I appreciate that, but let's work and let's try to get some more information. But that was the sleazy type of shit where at 6 o'clock we'll talk to you about the threat in the water.
Yeah, right. It's the old Jerry Seinfeld SNL bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something in your house is trying to kill you. Come back in 3 hours to find out what it is.
Yeah,
what?
Exactly. We'll have Adam Sandler here, and it's well, I guess technically you do because you have a picture of him.
Yeah, I mean, old habits die hard, man. That's the kind of shit they pulled even when there weren't strikes going on,
right,
in order to get people to be paying attention to shit. No, I mean, the other side of the coin is always remember, and I think this is something for us all to keep in mind, is that we don't know what's going on behind the scenes at any moment, and we do know that people have contracts that that SAG and the WGA,
Writers Guild of America.
WGA, thank you. The WWF.
Well, you bring up the WWF. That's an interesting thing too that we're going to touch on briefly this morning.
Yeah,
so
I don't know. We're gonna have a conversation on mic about exactly how deep we can get into even that shit with some of the stuff in the world. But anyway, keep in mind that this idea that they are open to allowing certain contracts to still continue in various ways for various reasons. I mean, some companies like A24, I'm happy to talk about A24 all we want, because they famously at this point, I think everybody's pretty well aware of this, have met with and been able to meet all union requests, so they're still able to continue to work. Right, and there's some other shows here and there that are in that same boat, or same movies that are in that same boat. So I mean, an actor or an actress being out there promoting their shit right now is not an indication of any type of line crossing. I'm not saying that won't happen at some point. I'm sure we'll hear about some asshole, and we'll have to discuss it and all that. But I would not have immediately jumped to the conclusion that there was something up to no good, because one of the big things that they said in all of their releases, right, is if you have current contracts you should honor those. The idea is that they're not going to be signing anymore, and for a lot of people those contracts come moment to moment. They're not necessarily in place. But like, I was watching a video, and I'll talk about this because it was pre union, and I thought it was weird that it went out there, but there's some stuff going around right now with Seth Rogen and Ice Cube on YouTube that are all promotional material for a struck movie. And it's just like, well, it's weird that this stuff is being released. But the thing is that I guarantee you they were all filmed in advance. And on top of that, they have no control over the release dates on those. On top of that, they are probably contracts that were in place from the pre-times, right? And they said specifically, you know, try and honor those, but with, you know, try and stick to our requests to the best of your ability. I know for a fact that, by the way, that one of the videos that I was watching with Seth Rogen was pre-filmed, because I went to go see said picture, and there was an intro movie with Seth Rogen thanking you for coming to the theater, and he was wearing the exact same outfit that he is in that he was in that YouTube video, and I was like, oh, all right.
This was all one day of filming for him. On that same thing, I had some friends who went and saw that Struck movie, and I got immediate.
This is just going to be the way we're going to have to talk, people, and you're just going to have to get used to it, because there's no way we can't talk about, like, there's no way to avoid this because of the way that entertainment is so intertwined nowadays. There's no way for us to talk about video games without having to talk about Disney right now with everything going on with Illusion Island, right? There's no way for us to talk about YouTube without us talking about how YouTube is kind of the weird gray area right now for a lot of this type of promotional material, because a lot of that stuff is not necessarily union supported. And what I mean in that way is not that the union's not like, you know, you can or can't do this, but rather the union's not involved, right? And so if the union's not involved, and is that work struck or not? Like, there's some weird conversations going on.
I mean, that, so yeah, so going back to the Struck movie, because then I would like to address the YouTube of it all. After they saw it, I got texts from people who went to go see the movie, people who were like, we're going to go see the film, saying, well, how was Seth Rogen able to do that? Why were they having, like, well, because it is done. Like, that already happened. I know that it's weird to see him being like, thanks for coming to the movies during this whole thing, because on the one hand, he is happy that you're seeing the film that he wrote and acted in, right? But on the other hand, like, yeah, right now they're on strike and they're not supposed to be promoting it, but that promotional film that you see before that particular struck film, and if you're out there and you still don't know what that struck film is, congratulations. That's all I want. That's all I have to say there. But it's very, like, all that promotional stuff is done. And that's the thing that people don't seem to understand, is that, like, it's not instantaneous. Like, when everything happened with Ocean Gate, and then a particular streaming service got a particular film on it, that was not in response to, oh my god, this topic is suddenly relevant again.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the reason people are having a hard time wrapping their heads around that is the last time that a strike like this happened, 10, 15 years ago,
2007, right? Man, 16.
Think about the ways in which the whole marketing landscape has changed in just a decade and a half. The idea that you have things like social media and YouTube and stuff that are big parts of the conversation now that just weren't on the fucking radar back then, right? So I think part of the reason that people are having a hard time wrapping their heads around this is the ways in which, like, new media has kind of come into play here. And again, the ways that contracts didn't really predict for that are part of the reason we're even here in the first place, right? But then the other side of that is also there's a lot of moves that companies made to try and, I'm not saying they succeeded in this, but they definitely have been trying for the last decade and a half to strike-proof themselves again. They did not want something like what happened last time to happen this time. They didn't want to get caught with their pants down, and a lot of what you're pointing out, right? The stuff with, like, having pre-planned interviews that they can easily turn to just reading an article on, having pre-filmed interviews that they can still be releasing because contracts state they're not going to be coming out at this time. Having all of this shit in the bag and waiting, it's part of the reason why that one particular producer had the fucking gall to say something like, we can survive till December, let's see if they can, right? Is because they know they have prepared this time in a way that last time we did not necessarily see them being prepared for this sort of thing. And in that, it's really muddied the waters from an outsider's perspective in a really frightening kind of culture war way, right? Like, it's succeeding in those moments when your friends are saying, why is this allowed? Or when your parents are saying, oh my god, Adam Sandler's going to be on the TV promoting a thing. It's like, well, imagine if you guys hadn't stuck around to watch, right? Imagine if you just heard that, gotten upset that it was going to happen, and turned it off. I wouldn't have blamed you for doing that, but you also then wouldn't have had the context of what they were really doing. And in your mind, there would have been people crossing picket lines and the thing, you know, all that sort of shit. Like, the ways in which that story can be shaped by this shit is scary. But that's all that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and especially here, we're recording this on the 98th day of the writer's strike, and the last one, the one in 2007, went historically 100 days. Like, everybody talks about, like, it's so interesting that it went exactly 100 days. That there's no way that this is going to be resolved in 2 days. Mostly because they've gone to the table to talk these past 2 Fridays, and no was just the response that they were granted. And it's kind of crazy. Like, the only metric that we have in our living lives, right, that we've lived through, is that 100 days. And this strike is now posed to go at least longer than those 100 days, if not like double that, if the threats of December are to be believed.
Right.
I mean, it's insane. And we are going to start seeing a lot of those tactics that make people question and make these decisions. Another anecdotal thing, right, because that's kind of all you have, is on Thursday after dinner, my father's like, how come I haven't received a People magazine in a while? Because he just got a subscription of that for his birthday. And is like, well, what are they going to write about, Dad? What's People magazine going to report on?
Yeah.
And he's like...
I mean, it's literally one big promotional
tool,
material, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then so when nobody can talk or nobody can,
I'm like, was it going to be about Dennis Decker? Dennis Decker's on the cover of freaking People magazine this week. Like, is that? And then he's like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. You always want to say the strike doesn't affect me. There is something that directly affected you, to the point that in a moment of silence, what you thought to bring up is, how come I don't have any People magazines? Because of what's happening, sir.
Yeah.
I
think people are really gonna slowly. I think we've hit a tipping point. Because we talked about this really early on in the strike talks about the idea that you know, we were scratching our heads a bit at the timing of the whole thing. You know, I had a couple of thoughts on why they may have started now, but even I had to admit that, like, yeah, this was kind of a weird moment, end of seasons and all of that, and then movies already kind of on rolling and shit. But we always did say, like, you know, if they don't get this thing resolved in a certain amount of time, you sure as hell will notice it. I think we're hitting that point, right? Yeah. Is like, I do think that we are about to see that exact kind of timeline, the December timeline that's been laid out, completely as a, you know, in like a moment of pure like shittiness, right? So the other thing is I don't know how much truth I want to necessarily lend to that comment because of how petty it was in the moment that it was said. But if that is, since that is the only thing that we have to hang our hat on, let's, right? Mm-hmm. If that is to be believed, this is the test. Because we have now had our movies come out. We have now had our summer TV either start or get flipped, you know, and replaced or whatever they're going to do. Basically, they have set up the defenses. Now we have to see if they can hold up. And I don't know how well they're going to hold up. With some of the conversations that people have been having, the cracks are starting to show, and I don't know. I don't think they can say that they've got the material to last to December, but that doesn't mean that that's going to keep people happy, right? So, I don't know, man.
So at this point, I said I wanted to talk about the YouTube of everything that's going on. This is a reminder that the Say Report, everything that we're doing, that the thing that we're not going to talk about, struck work in the realms of television or motion pictures, that is a voluntary choice on the part of Sejohn and I. We have weighed, we have figured out what we wanted to do, and by the very nature of the show being able to be about everything, we were able to soldier on and keep doing the Say Report. And again, the fact that our other show is very, very directly about a certain thing that has struck work, that's why it's on hiatus. And again, that was our choice, right? We are not members of SAG-AFTRA. I want to make sure that that is known. And that's it. Like, that's just a decision we made, right? We understand how important the entertainment is in our lives, and we would like to make sure that the people who are creating that entertainment are fairly compensated for it. And then, like, the hope of hopes is that once they're fairly compensated, everybody suddenly starts to get fairly compensated for their work in the country, right? Like, it'll be a slow burn, but it's what will happen. Which now brings us to the topic of YouTube and the fact that without celebrities to promote films and television, they are turning to influencers. And I don't know how I feel about the fact that SAG-AFTRA can say to these influencers, if you take one of these projects, don't ever consider joining our union. I mean, are you there with that? Have you heard anything there, or?
I mean, like, in regards that that's their rule, like, yeah, I mean, we read that literal thing out here on this very show
Right.
when we were talking about why we were making, part of why we were making the decision to do this very thing is that, like, the only real consequence that they can hold anybody to as a union, truly, as, like, the worst thing that they can do to an individual in this particular case is say, if you scab, you're never going to join our union. Like, that is the power that they hold. And that power is only as good as they prove it to be, right? So, like, it's an interesting little kind of prisoner's dilemma in that regard of, like, who's going to crack first? Is somebody going to just walk the line and say you're not worth my time, because a lot of people in this country don't love unions, or is the union going to be able to really kind of hold this line and prove to people why it's worth holding off to be a part of their whole shebang, right? So, like, in that regard, that's always been a rule for them. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't surprise me. Where, like, is that offending you in some way?
So I guess where it is that, like, so journalists are able to continue what they do, right? Even though they're on television programs and things like that. The journalists are not on strike, right? So news is kind of the only new content that is currently being created, right? Athletes are still able to perform what they do. Going into WWF, AEW, and the things there that we'll probably touch on later. I know we'll touch on at least one thing later, because of what it mirrors there. But, like, influencers, who are people who do not appear in motion pictures or on television, right? Who are making their own YouTube content, their own TikTok content, like, being threatened in that way, it hit weirdly, right? For me, it hit me just that little bit strangely. Because, like, they're doing their job the way that they do their job. And, I mean, and I guess it's... And there are, like...
Right, but the rule is the rule is the rule. They can't just,
Right.
like...
No, no.
Like, if they said, okay, that's literally exactly the point, though.
Yeah.
If they say, like, hey, don't do this thing because of the ways that it hurts us... unless it's your job, well, that's everybody. That's the whole. That's
Yeah.
That's every actor. That's every writer. It's like then they get to cross that line because they're like, well, I'm just doing my job. No, that's the point. They're asking people to not do their job,
yes.
so that they can prove that how important they are. They're asking you to put their well-being above your paycheck for a while to prove a point. That is the whole point of a strike.
Yes. I don't know. It just... The way that it was approached there, and then also I think I have a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. That one specifically because, I mean, what we do here and everything that we do, we're such an anomaly in terms of content creation as far as, like, I'm concerned. I'm not doing this to get rich. In fact, this costs me money more than it makes me money. I will just admit that right here on the show. But, like, if you're out there trying to become an influencer and suddenly Sony Pictures is like, hey, do you want to talk about Across the Spider-Verse for an hour? Like, that's, like, their dream, right? Isn't that, like, what you're doing? And then you have to put that above. And I get that. But then, I guess
I mean, you're talking about the conversation that every single person in this union has had to have with themselves over the last 3
No, I know. But like,
yes.
It became like, I could see it, but then I guess where it stems from, right? We talk about the A24, and we talk about all these, like, interim contracts that allow that, like, you can keep working despite it. Like, that seems counterintuitive to the strike. Because a movie that A24 does, right? Are they then not going to sell it for streaming to one of these services, which then also can create, like, revenue for them? Like, it just seems like... It seems like the two hands are not working together.
But it's not counterintuitive at all. What they're showing is that a company like A24, one of the smallest movie production houses out there right now, is able to meet the financial demands of the union. If they can do it, then it literally proves that Warner Brothers and Disney and all of these guys have no leg to stand on by trying to say that it would the ways that it would harm their industry. they literally have a counterpoint to point at and say, well, there's this entire company that's able to pull this shit off right now. So what are you talking about? Like, I don't think that it's counterintuitive to what they're doing. I think it's actually...
So the fear that I have, right, and again, it's a what if scenario, and those are not the best things to work in, is if these smaller companies are able to do all of the work, and the big companies, all they then have to pay is the licensing and distribution rights, where is their incentive to meet the demands of those people who are striking?
Well, I think there'd be a different conversation if A24 was in talks to like sell a bunch of their shit to you know, Max, say, to go on, just to I mean, we just so we can't keep talking to vagaries here.
Yeah.
Like,
no, that's good.
If they're going to turn around and sell their shit to somebody to then put onto a streaming service, I think that's a different conversation. But I'll be honest, that's not happening.
As long as that doesn't happen, that's true. But I mean, it's happened in the past, like, right? Midsummer was on one.
But then
like,
they wouldn't be in compliance with the SAG-AFTRA requests, and therefore they would then be breaking those contracts. Like, the whole thing is that the reason that they are allowed to continue to work is because they're specifically following these requests. The idea that and when we say allowed to continue working, like without union like interference of some kind, because let's be honest, any of these people could keep working if they wanted to. It's just that the union would then say, like, you're no longer, you know, this is no longer union sanctioned, and they would request members of their union. Like, you're getting to the root of why unions like
exist,
how unions
right?
exist.
Yeah,
it's all a construct. I mean, the whole system's a construct, and the whole thing is based on the idea that some people are behaving in a way that we deem acceptable, and some people are behaving in a way that we don't. And like, I don't. Like, the SAG has laid some rules out for what they deem acceptable, and so if somebody's not going to behave in that way, then they don't get to play the game. That's the whole point of this whole thing, and that means everybody. I mean, you say that it wasn't a hard decision for us because we don't have that much skin in the game. Sure, right? But like, as much skin as we had, we still felt like we needed to make a point, right?
Yeah.
And that's true across the board. I mean, this is like complaining about protesters standing in the middle of the street. Well, yeah, they're supposed to be disruptive.
Supposed to be a disruption, yeah.
Right, like this strike is really asking people to really put their paychecks on the line. Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what a strike does. And hopefully the union is there to prove that they can support you through it, right? That's why you've paid into the union for the 16 years since the last strike.
And I think that they would point to somebody like an influencer asking if there's anything that, you know, like asking them to stay away from this particular material, much like we are able to definitely avoid this material in order to just talk about other things. Therefore, we're not giving up this little piece that we like to, you know, we like to put out every week, but at the same time, we're still able to be in compliance. That's all that they're asking people. They're not saying, hey, don't go on YouTube and make money. They're just saying, hey, can you make sure that your revenue stream is coming from somewhere that isn't this? And that influencer can be as upset as they want that that the opportunity has come along for them to talk about Spider-Verse at a time when SAG-AFTRA has asked them not to, and they can say, sorry, no, because I have a million other ways I can make that money, guys. Like, the thing is like, Sony is not going to come around to a small influencer and completely change their life. That's just not how it happens. YouTubers are not supported by, like, they're not magically supported someday by a company that shows up. YouTubers and Twitch streamers and wherever the hell else they are nowadays, like, those people are first and foremost building an audience. If they are somebody that is created by the system, then I have no love for them anyway.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If you're talking about
you
like
smell
a
I get
Monkeys style like YouTuber created by Sony in order to promote their shit, then good. Yeah, they shouldn't get to work in this industry. That's gross to begin with.
Yeah, I mean that is Sony producing scabs. I'll admit I got some troubling news, and like troubling news, and just that like it disappointed me and plans that I had. So I did kind of start recording and chose violence on this. So I was kind of playing that other side of it. But I think that we have unlocked a very interesting conversation about this strike and what it means to be compliant when you're not a member of the union. Yeah. Right? Because that's another question that I have been getting is like, well, why do you guys feel? It's like, because I want there to be more movies and more TV. I don't want this to be the end of entertainment the way that we knew it. I want there to be success. And even
the biggest thing is that while we are not part of the union, we are in a unique position to be able to show support for this thing in a public facing way.
Yeah.
And so in that we have a responsibility, and I'll be frank, a desire, like
Yes.
to be able to do something as somebody that's not part of the union, but to be able to show support in any way feels really good because of how much the work that the union does in turn supports what we do here. Right, like, and so like it's one of those rare times that is not just like a financial thing, like where where we do say go out and spend your money on this. It's one of those rare times we get to show actual like thought and support for a thing that otherwise, like, the best thing that we can do is just throw money at it.
Yeah, that's well put, Sejohn. And if this were Sejohn's final thoughts, that'd be the end of the episode. But we got other topics to talk about, which I guess last one on this, and then we'll put all the strike talk aside. This morning I was sent an article. This is not the thing that was troubling, just to make sure that everybody knows, about the distaste that people have for CM Punk showing up at an AEW show in a SAG-AFTRA on strike shirt. And that is interesting to me. That it falls into the whole, like, we just want athletes to play the sport, we don't want them to have opinions sort of conversation that has been pretty pervasive.
Yeah, anybody watching AEW and feeling that, though, has not been paying attention to AEW. That's where he showed up.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Their whole thing was that they were going to be the more progressive version of wrestling. Like, they really felt that the WWE and what was going on with Triple H and McMahon, it was stunting a lot of the both creative and, cultural like nature of the sport. Wrestling has always been disruptive, has always been a thing that has kind of been fringe, right? Lived on the edge, and it got really popular, but popular doesn't mean that it wasn't also still boundary pushing in a lot of ways, right? Like wrestling in the 90s and the 2000s, like, really moved the needle for a lot of people in this country about their, like, personal beliefs, right? That's like, this is not a judgment one way or the other. This is just a reality, right? Like, it's like saying, it's like pointing to Marvel movies and saying that, like, anybody that is out there just consuming just Marvel films, and there's a lot of people where that's just kind of the big things that they've done in terms of going to the movies over the last 20 years, like, it definitely feeds a certain type of mindset and worldview, right? Like, and that's somebody that is on board with that shit. But that's everything we talk about. It's like, his culture helps form and shape our opinions and ways in which we interact with things in this world. And wrestling was a force to be reckoned with. And AEW was formed specifically by a group of people in that world that felt that what they were seeing in the WWE did not reflect their personal values, worldview, concepts for the sport, concepts for the storylines, concepts for the people, right? And the ways in which people are treated. One of their biggest things is that they have a much more progressive pay system than the WWE does, and things like that. So I just, it's such a weird concept to think that somebody showed up at AEW with a political statement and people were just like, no, not in our house. And it's like, no, literally in your house.
Literally in your house is what it's for. But then what I think about, and granted, the SAG-AFTRA strike is nowhere near what Colin Kaepernick was kneeling during the national anthem during, right? Mm-hmm. Two completely different things. One is basic human rights. One is compensation, and they're not the same. But I like the idea that these people have a platform, have opinions that, like, you would think should be, like, kind of globally understood, right? I guess I look at the CM Punk of it all in terms of, like, you guys should understand that, like, this is what the show you're watching is about, right? It's kind of what it stands for. It's what you just brought to the table about AEW, right? It would really be something if it were on a WWE broadcast, right? Because that'd kind of be, like, flagrantly against the company that he's currently promoting for.
Yeah, that would be somebody putting themselves in some serious danger in terms of their job and future in the industry. Yeah.
Not just their job, but, like, they'd probably open themselves up to legal issues as well in terms of their contracts and things. Like, overreach from that particular company. But then I'm thinking, like, and I know that it's too grossly like different things to even try to compare, but I think it like bleeds down to the fact that, like, look at all the money you make, look at what you are, how dare you use that platform to try to like cite an issue and bring about change. That's so strange to me. Right?
Yeah, people, I mean, people always get really weird when celebrities try and get involved in. I mean, it's the stay in your lane conversation, which is always bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is a point at which you say, like, you should be well versed in a topic before you start like spousing opinions and getting people on your side about it. You know, like, say Terrence Howard talking about teriology and the ways in which math doesn't make sense to him. Like, that probably shouldn't be promoted into the world, right? And I have an issue with the ways in which maybe some people latch onto that sort of stuff and put it out there. But at the end of the day, like, I also am not out there raging a campaign to silence Terrence Howard in the world just because he thinks 1 × 1 = 2. Like, that's just not, it's not worth my energy. But it's also not something that I feel like I would very quickly hit a wall of, you don't really have the right to be saying and doing certain things in the ways in which you are, right? Like, and it's the, and I don't, you know, like, I don't believe that.
Yeah,
like,
you don't live your life like that at all. Like, yeah.
Right. So that idea being that, like, just because somebody is in some type of position, they're not able to discuss the problematic nature of that position is, as you put it, like, ass backwards, right? Like, it's just bizarre. Like, there's like, people should be able to talk from that side of the fence, even if they are the ones, you know, even if they are part of the problem. They should be able to highlight that, if anything, because they've got information you don't have in that regard, right? Like the ways in which, like, when somebody at that level says, hey, the system is broken, I want to know what they know. Right? My first thought is not, they don't get the right to talk about this. My first thought is, man, they know so much more about me about this than I do. I would really love to get some more information from that person and find out what they know, right? And so, like, that's really weird.
Yeah, and I mean, also, I mean, CM Punk is one of those wrestlers who did transcend, and he was on, like, heels. He's appeared on television programs. So him also wearing a shirt acknowledging that, like, I'm on a wrestling show where I am denoted as an athlete. So it's not technically scabbing to be here right now, but then using that platform to call attention to that other thing that he's probably connected to, either as a member or just tangentially. Like, I think that's the best way to play that.
Yeah.
Like, and then you have the question of, well, is it because people don't like this particular athlete, right? A lot of people think CM Punk is, like, has a superiority attitude around himself. So
and CM Punk is one example. I mean, I'll even throw Kaepernick into this conversation, this particular part of it, because the other important thing to remember is we don't know behind the scenes what conversations are being had in terms of things like contracts and stuff. A guy like CM Punk, AEW, being as progressive as they are, they still hold people to contracts. They're a business. There's always going to be part of the math there. Right. And if he has a contract, if he is contracted to be there on a certain night, even if he doesn't want to be there in support of things, but as you pointed out, they're somewhat tangentially related to the strike. I don't know if they have writers for AEW like they do for other shows and things like that. But, like, I know that there's a lot of like game shows and sports places that are kind of struggling right now.
I mean, yeah, what we're seeing with Jeopardy is crazy. What we are seeing with Jeopardy, or even
is Sports
insane.
Center, was it? I think one of the big sports talk shows, you know, the talking head shows, is also in a weird place right now where they're kind of like relying on improv conversations and it's not going well. You know, that kind of thing. Like, we're like, there are writers everywhere. You just where you least expect them. Sometimes actors too. But so in that nature, like, if CM Punk is in this position, if Kaepernick is in this position where he is contracted to be on the field, if you know, with Kaepernick, this was a huge part of the deal.
Yeah.
Is like, he's like, I'm obligated to do something in this moment, but I'm not obligated to do a specific thing in this moment. So he flipped the script and he kneeled, right?
Right.
With CM Punk, I am obligated to be on screen at this time, and I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that at this point. Well, follow your contract, but do what you can to support us. Well, what I can do to support you is I can wear a fucking sign while I'm up there, right? Like the ways in which people are in a position where they may or may not be able to push forward, and I will never judge anybody for that. I know that it's easy to. I know that there's probably somebody out there right now thinking I have no problem judging people just because they need to follow what a piece of paper says. I I find that it is a much more complicated conversation than that. And you know, we need to maintain some sense of nuance. As much as we do want to draw hard lines and be blunt about who can do what and say what, or what is more, it's not necessarily about you can or can't do this. We always have to remember, much like with the YouTube stuff we were talking about, this is a request. These are requests from the union to behave in this way in order to show support for them. And we can only meet that request to the best of our ability, and only we know our own story, right? So it's really weird to start harping on people for doing certain things, unless it's like a blunt, like, fuck you middle finger to the unions on this strike right now. I'm not gonna hold anybody to that sort of shit right now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I liked most about getting that article this morning, having that sent to me right before we record, was that is somebody who I know listens to the show, and we thank you for your support. And because we have been sort of breaking down the strike and explaining it, they're now more aware of it. So then, like, they caught it when they watched the broadcast, and then they saw the article, and they're like, this is crazy to me. Because, like, before I heard you talk about it, I was not even, aware of what the reach of SAG-AFTRA and what this strike truly meant. So, like, I guess it was kind of cool to have that. Like, I joked that we kind of did edutainment in that episode where we went through, like, the podcaster guidelines, but we educated, and that's cool to me. Because I would have never thought that,
you know, we are in a really interesting position as people that are in no way related to the unions, but, like, have the kind of support and respect for the unions that we do. We find ourselves in this position to do this kind of stuff, and that's, I appreciate that and want to continue to try and use that for a force for good.
Yeah. Well, now that I think we're done with that, right? Any other strike stuff that you want to talk about in this opening section? Because
no, it's not the last time we'll talk about it.
No, I certainly...
Any other thoughts I have, I'm sure we will have other episodes to talk about it.
Well, and especially as, like, it is an ever-growing and changing, evolving, like, topic, right?
I will eat my hat if by next week it's over. You said, I think it's going to go much further than 100 days.
And I don't want it to. I want to make sure that people are like me saying, I think that it could, like, go double the longest strike that we've seen. That's not something I'm excited about. That is just something, reading the temperature of the water, I know how long bacteria could continue to grow and thrive and survive in it. And that's terrifying. Like, I think that's what bothers me the most. Is that, like, as much as that was an offhanded comment, the whole we can last till December thing, like, I'm not seeing anything to disprove that right now.
Well, at least nobody's come out and asked the question, what's the real timeline, right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody seems to have asked that question right now, and I think it might be because some people are afraid to, and I don't blame them for that.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But I have seen people who, like, actors, say that, like, I am already suffering because of this. Like, you see the tweets and you see the, like, I might not be able to continue affording my housing. And that's scary. That's scary. But, like, it's why they strike, right? That's why they're doing it, right? A friend brought to my attention someone that he knows who's an actor who, like, is suffering because of it. And my response is, like, you know, this is why they strike. Man, this is exactly why they're doing it. Like, yeah, I know that the amount of money that you talked about, I don't want to, like, blow up this person's spot too hard. The amount of money you talked about, it might seem negligible to somebody in the entertainment industry, but, like, as we're finding out, no, it might not be, right? That residual for the writer on Suits, which has become just, like, the biggest thing in streaming right now.
Yeah.
Being like, I made $250 off of the 12 billion watch hours my content generated. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it. Which, so, Sejohn, I'm going to start with my task, the task you gave me. And I need to be honest with you. I think that personally, I might be depressed. I think that Devon Decker is, like, seriously dealing with some depression right now, because it is very difficult for me to want to do anything after I get done with work. I'm in, like, a real stagnation sort of rut in terms of, like, when I'm home from work, I'm just kind of happy to be done with work, and I don't want to do anything else. So I will say this. I did get a copy of John Dies at the End. I went to my local library, and by my local library, living in the state of Rhode Island, it was in Cranston, but it's the same distance to the library in Coventry as it is to the library in Cranston, which is crazy, right? That people in this state think that a 30-minute drive means an overnight bag is required. When, like, no, I mean, I could drive 15 minutes this way and be at the Coventry Library, or I can drive 15 minutes the other way and be at the Cranston Library.
It always bit me in the ass a lot when we were in college, because like we'd be at a party and then we'd be like, you know, like tired and perhaps drunk, and this idea that like, we probably shouldn't drive home, and everybody's being like, where do you live? Like, oh, well, Providence, right? And everybody's just like, oh, that's a 20-minute drive from here. You should stay the night.
Yeah.
And it's just like, fair enough. But then you wake up the next morning and you're home before anybody even wakes up.
Yeah, exactly. You wake up like and you're sober, or like you're just not tired anymore. You're awake enough to drive. And it's like, did Sejohn stay here tonight? Or did I just imagine that he was going to do that?
You kind of have that. You have that period in your life where, like, when you live anywhere else, like, yeah, you go out, you're just like, yeah, we're going to be at a friend's house for the night. I didn't have a lot of that because I didn't have the excuse to and be like, I'm only 20 minutes away. Should I really stay here for the night? Yeah, like I said, with the drinking part, it usually became a pretty easy answer, but that was not always the case.
But also,
sometimes
like,
it was just I'm lazy.
With the drinking part, it turned into a lot of, we're just gonna sit on their front lawn until we're sober enough to drive.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. And it's like, and it's not like, and it's not even one of those like, oh, I'm buzzed, like I'm good to drive. Like, it'd be like, no, we would have 2-3 hour conversations in the street.
With a lot of water and a lot of pissing in the sewer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, having these conversations. Those are some of my favorite things. One of the people, they lived out in like the sticks of Coventry. We crossed the road and sat on a stone wall that was across the street from their house. There were no other houses nearby. And we sat on that stone wall for 2 hours, and it's like, yeah, you know what? I can drive now. I'm good, right? And in a lot of ways, like, that's the after party in Rhode Island. It's not like some secondary location. It is literally like hanging out outside, sobering up. Man, those
because
are,
again,
those
you really only have a 15-20 minute drive ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and I would be a lot more comfortable in my own bed. In a lot of ways, I think living in Rhode Island has, like, deterred me from wanting to spend the night anywhere else. Because, like, yeah, you know, so it's 45 minutes to my house right now. But I'd be in my own bed. I think I'm going to do that. Man. I don't know. But yeah, so I go to that, and I would like to thank the librarian who helped us out finding the copy of it. He showed a real interest in when he found out that we were reading it for our podcast. I wish I had thought to write down his name. I did not. But if you are listening, thank you very much for your help in helping me get a copy of John Dies at the End by David Wong. But I'm going to say this. I've only spent an hour reading the book.
Yes. That's okay. Here's the thing. The first... I don't even know what to call it.
The introduction.
But it's like a whole story unto itself.
Oh, I'm like, if this is the story, to find that story is not going to be related to anything else that happens, other than the fact that like it is a really good introduction to the characters and the world that they live in. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm on board. And then I got a little bit through They China Food, the first book one. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop though, because I know I'm not going to get anywhere substantial before we record.
Yeah.
So,
no, but we don't even have to talk too much in terms of details, because I couldn't even begin. Like, any detail you talk about is either utterly meaningless or so important to the end I don't want to ruin it for anybody. Right. So like it's one of those types of books in that regard. More importantly to me was I don't know if I've ever read another book that is so truly absurd, so truly chaotic. We've talked a lot on this podcast about my love for Terry Pratchett, your love for Douglas Adams, this like this kind of the silly sci-fi that's out there, the silly fantasy stuff that's out there, all of this, right? I mean, even if I think about books like House of Leaves, which is another big favorite of mine, and the ways in which that gets so mind bendy, and there's some of that mind bendingness in John Dies at the end, and in subsequent sequels. The other thing is that this is a series that I think at this point is 5 books long. Like it goes all sorts of weird places, and in the book itself, in the series, and the sequels, and all that. The absurdity, the level of absurdity, even into the prose of David Wong's writing is just a whole other fucking level, right? And that is either, I have found with this story for a lot of people, make or break, right? Like there are some people out there that just cannot read this shit, cannot stand it. Do you know much about how it was written?
No. I mean, it seems like stream of consciousness in like just the truest sense of the word. Not even
So
just stream of consciousness. That type of writing that you see in horror movies where they're like, just put a pen in your hand and put it on top of a piece of paper and we'll
yeah,
see
yeah,
what happens. Because that's
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
unconscious mind talking. Like, it's.
um,
Yeah.
so David Wong is a pen name, perhaps an entirely pen personality for the writer Jason Pargin, Pargin maybe. But for anybody that doesn't know that name, he was a writer at Cracked for a while. I think actually like one of the big writers there. I don't know too much about his history at Cracked, but while he was writing for Cracked, he was also then writing a blog under the name of David Wong, and that blog is what you eventually see become John Dies at the End, and so it was written in a very kind of like I don't know the best way to put it. It's he didn't really kind of have an ending in mind because he didn't really know what the story was becoming or going to become. And I think actually one of the things I will kind of hint at for later on in the book, because it's something that becomes very obvious later and once it becomes a series, the focus and purposeful nature of the writing becomes much clearer, for good or for ill. I actually, it was kind of one of those things for me that was a little bit of a kind of a downturn towards the end of the book, is how much more kind of on point the story starts to finally get. And then, as I said, in subsequent sequels, like he clearly has like structure in a way that the early pages of John Dies at the End feels like it doesn't. But it is by the nature of he was just writing chapters and just posting them under this pen name David Wong, and like he was allowed to get as absurd as he wanted because he didn't have any overhead, he didn't have anybody telling him what could and couldn't be done. And then it just became so popular that he ended up kind of stringing a narrative into it, and then it became so popular that it ends up getting published as a book, right? And then the book becomes so popular it goes on to subsequently have sequels, get made into a movie, like all of that. But it comes from a place of completely no boundaries, and that is something that I think is so very purely unique to it. I think that that's what lends itself to how fucking weird it allows itself to get. And like, and as I said, like it even bleeds into the prose to the point where I don't think you can talk about this in true, like, you know, English lit nature of like whether or not it's good prose or bad prose, because it doesn't follow these certain rule sets that I learned about, but from this one professor, even though this other professor probably has a whole different set of rules. Like that conversation is just like off the table at some point, because like he's just writing. There's at some point there's a run-on sentence in which the subject changes like 3 times somewhere in like the middle of the book. Like crazy shit like that happens, and you have to just, the ways in which the story just kind of says like you just have to kind of come with us. You're either on board or you're not, and if you're not on board, like you might still be keel hauled behind. Like it's really fascinating like writing and style of writing. And yeah, and so like I think the reason why I'm latching onto it right now is back onto it right now is I read this book for the first time 4 or 5 years ago, fell in love with it, read subsequently a couple of the sequels, have not read them all, and then just kind of, you know, like you do with some things sometimes in culturally, like just kind of walked away for a bit, and then you rediscover them later, right? And I'm in that first kind of rediscovery of this. This is my first time going back to this particular world, and it probably won't be my last, considering how much fun I'm even having this time. But this idea that like I have not encountered anything like it since I read it, and at the time I thought I don't think I've ever encountered anything like this before. there are one or two things in the world that we could maybe point to, directions that culture has gone in since this book kind of hit, that we could talk about, but obviously there's certain things we couldn't because of the nature of like the film side of things and the television side of things. But like, I don't even know if I would call this book necessarily like influential. First of all, it's only been out for less than a decade, right? I think the first one came out in
2009, I want to say. I remember, like I said, I mentioned that my friend Emilio was always on me to read this book. He's like, you got to read this book. You got to read this book. It is so you.
John John Dies at the End is 2007, and so it's only been out for 13 years, right? Like there's not, I don't know, 16 at this point. But like, I think it needs to be around much longer before we can start talking about it being a quote unquote influential book. My hope is it becomes one of those things that in 10 years we hear people referencing, talking about like, yeah, like I didn't really, I once I read this book, it taught me that I didn't have to care about the rules. Like I want to hear somebody talk about that, because that's one of the big things that I think that I want to point to this series is really doing for me. Is it really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that I can enjoy a thing that goes against every innate fiber of my being in terms of the education that I've been given, both culturally and academically. Like the schooling that I have had taught me this book shouldn't work, because of the ways in which it's written, because of the ways in which it's presented, because of the ways in which I discovered it, because of the ways in which it got birthed into this world. Everything about this book should just be a complete turnoff to me, and it's not. It's quite the opposite. It's something that I adore, and that has really been cool to rediscover.
So for me, there's a couple of things here. One, knowing that it's 2007, suddenly the fact that I'm like, wow, this kind of feels like every apartment I ever went into in college totally tracks, because that's what apartments looked like in 2007, was DVDs everywhere and big old TVs with 4 video game systems. And there was a particular apartment that we hung out with at that is John's apartment from the opening narrative. Yeah. You know it, I know it. We broke into it a couple of times, and you know, I think we're outside the statute of limitations to be tried for those actions, for those illegal acts.
Yeah, most of the time we were breaking in because we were making breakfast or letting in their girlfriends, but that's a different thing.
That's a different. Yeah, that's true. Occasionally it was for acts of violence, like I'm going to beat Super Mario World 100%. Take a video of me doing it and then delete it so that you'll never know.
I'm gonna turn this microwave on and forget to put anything in it for 60 minutes.
Oh my god! I would like to point out that those stories definitely autobiographical by the people who told the stories. Wonderful memories. But yeah, so the fact that it evoked that sort of nostalgia for me of my time in college tracks. Like, I'm like, this is nostalgic writing for something I've never read before. But then the other reason that I think I feel that is reading the prose of the novel, it reads a lot like how my internal monologue goes, like my own personal internal monologue. And that was kind of fucking crazy to be like, wow, someone else thinks like me and they're writing it down. But like, it was also kind of nice. Like it kind of like welcomed me in like a shawl on a windy day.
Well, I think more than anything, it's this idea that you talk about this, it feels like it's your own personal internal monologue. And I think that's one of the big things for me is that up until the point that I read this, a lot of the stuff that I have read in my life, a lot of the stuff that I've latched onto my life were written by people of a different generation than me. This is the first novel that I can actually kind of pull that is written by somebody that is my age, that's in my age group, right? Like I mean, like maybe like the Aragon series, but he's so purposely, Paolini is so purposely writing those ones in Tolkien-esque, right? Like that like it doesn't, he's following rules, right? He's going out of his way to write classically. Like so maybe there's this whole other set of people that read YA, that read, that read romance novels that have been keeping up with more current writers that wouldn't necessarily have this mind-blowing kind of opening, realization that like people my age can write interesting stuff, and in that are going to write it in their own way. They're not going to follow these rules. You know, they're not going to write like Neil Gaiman. They're not going to write like Stephen King, because those were the writers of the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's got about 10 years on us, but still, it does feel like our generation, or at least what we were spoken to and what we were taught is coming through in how it's written. There's a moment in that opening, right? I'm going to talk about this. I don't know if it's going to be relevant later on, but it reminded me of a stupid fucking joke that we would talk when we would like have these big game days where we'd sit and play video games for hours and hours. And we would tell the urban legend about the Rottweiler. Do you know this urban legend? Or am I?
I don't.
Okay.
Blow my mind. Tell me the urban legend about the. Did somebody flush a Rottweiler down the drain and it came back 5 years later?
So the urban legend about the Rottweiler is that it's a young girl. She's teenage, and her parents have to go away for the week, and they leave the weekend, and they leave her alone at home.
Wow. They leave the Rottweiler in charge.
And they leave her with her dog, which is this big Rottweiler. So while they're away, she sees a news report that a psycho killer has escaped from like the local sanitarium. So she's nervous about that, right? And she's like, oh my God. So she has the Rottweiler sleep in her room with her, right? And she's laying in bed after hearing this, and she has her hand over the bed, and the dog is licking her hand in that soothing sort of way that dogs do, right? If that was a direct quote from the novel, John dies at the end, I apologize. But like, that's how we told the story. So the dog's licking her hand and that. So then in the middle of the night, she wakes up, right? Because she starts hearing this dripping sound from the bathroom. And she's nervous, and she's like, oh my God, it could be the guy. Like, what's happening? So she puts her hand over the edge, and then the dog licks her hand in that reassuring way. So she's like, okay, no, it's fine. I'm just a little scared because I saw the news report. Everything's going to be okay. So the next morning, when she stumbles into the bathroom, she finds that Rottweiler just completely butchered, dismembered, and its parts are hanging in the shower. That was the dripping she was hearing. And then written in the Rottweiler's blood on the mirror is the message, humans can lick too. So the guy broke in, killed the dog, and then licked her hand to reassure her that the dog...
Like a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode? That was a fucked up way of telling it. So here's the thing. I have heard that urban legend before. I've never heard it described as the urban legend about the Rottweiler. It's always...
Well, I didn't want to ruin it.
No, like, and also I've heard it in much cleaner ways than like the dog is dead. Also, there's also just ones where like, you know, I thought the dog was licking my hand, but then the dog barked in the other room or something, or the dog walked in the like that kind of shit. You didn't have to go full on Clive Barker on it, but
that's what we would do, though. That's how we would tell the story.
Well, of course, yeah. It's mid 2000s, and we were a bunch of edgelords. But
mid 2000s. I think the last time we've done a Humans Can Lick 2 session was like 2016. So I'm just being honest.
Yeah, I mean, well, it becomes like the Aristocats, right? Like, or the
Aristocrats. The Aristocats is very different. When Abraham Delancey, I can't do the rest of Thomas O'Malley Cat's name. I just don't have it ready to go. Leaps and lands in duchesses.
Is Aristocats just a really tame version of the Aristocrats?
No, I wish. You know what? When Disney does the live-action remake of Aristocats, I certainly hope so. We can't talk about it further because it's a movie. It's technically a struck work. Yeah. So, like, I'd love to talk about that just a little bit more because I'm a fan of that one. So when all of this resolves, someone out there in podcast land, please send us a reminder to discuss that Disney film about the royal cats.
Anyway,
yeah.
So you were saying, and here's the thing. I don't know why you're talking about this story right now, but I could tell that it fits right the fuck in with John dies at the end. But anyway, go on.
Oh, I mean, the opening of the novel, that exact urban legend is kind of touched on and played with.
Right.
And it was great. And I'm just like, oh. And also, I mean, I'm supposed to be hanging out with like a lot of my Humans Can Lick 2 people. later this week for some epic gaming. So, like, of course I'm thinking about that one. Like, you know, it's a fun urban legend. I mean, my other favorite one is Wait Till Martin Comes, but we'll wait till a little later for me to do a Devon Decker retelling of Wait Till Martin Comes.
We I look forward to it. I recommend that if you're in the mood for a fucking wild ride of a book, like, pick up John Daisley, and if you fall off of it at some point, just experience it, just to know that it exists in the world.
But if you fall off of it because, oh, this book suddenly became too much like a book, those are the words you have to say out loud. If someone asks you about it, oh, it became too much of a book for me. What the fuck does that mean? I guess you'll have to read it to figure it out. So I intend to continue, especially I have a lot of free time coming up this week. I have a couple of days off, and I have less, like, responsibilities. Like, here's the other thing. Even though the strike's going on, I was going for our movie a day streak that ended at 16. Watching film. Like, that felt pretty good for a minute there. But then last night, I'm like, it's 11:30. I haven't watched a movie yet. I could start something, and technically the streak would continue. Or I could be free from this ridiculous chain I have collared around my neck. It's just a number. Yeah. It's just the number that I'm making go up.
I think, you know, like, the other big thing for me is that around this time that this comes out, 2007, and then subsequently, you know, I end up reading it like 10 years later. But, like, in that period, there was also a very big rise and fall in the popularity. And this is not like a knock against them, but, like, Chuck Palahniuk, right? Like his whole, their whole, didn't they come out? Actually, I apologize. I'm pretty sure I might be misremembering that.
I don't know. Chuck Palahniuk is one of those authors who kept getting talked around me, and I did the Devon Decker thing, and I know it might not be mine, but I will trademark it for this story, where if everybody is talking about it, I think I'm going to wait to give it any of my attention.
Yeah, no, but because of exactly that, right? Like, there's this kind of like vibe around, like, reading edgy, more absurd, like sometimes scary, sometimes funny, sometimes both at the same time, like, kind of writing that, like, it's very, like, it feels kind of like rock in the 90s, like there's, like, this, like, grungy aspect to it, right? And, like, writing just got there, like, 20 years too late, I think. But there's just this, like, there's this kind of feeling with David Wong or Jason Perrigan, if you want to call him by, I think that he's actually going by his real name now in his writing. Like there's something around his writing that lives in that same world, but clicked with me so much faster. Because, like, I love, like, Palahniuk, because, like, I do have books by them that I adore. Diary is one of my favorite scary stories of all time. And, you know, and Fight Club is definitely something worth talking about, I think, and always will be, like, that kind of shit. But at the end of the day, like, if I think about my top 5 books that I, like, want to make sure I keep on me every time I move, like, John Dies at the End is one of those first books that goes in the pile.
Oh, I mean, I have an idea of that, but let's save it for next week, and maybe I will challenge you to read one of my top 5 books.
Okay.
And it's not going to be what you think, is what I'm going to say.
Okay.
Or maybe it is. Life is weird that way. But yeah, so I am happy I read it. I certainly hope that I have it till the 18th, and I can always call the library and extend the rental period or the borrowing period. But I think that with the time off I have coming up and the fact that, like, I only have one other possible responsibility outside of work, that I still need to make a decision whether or not I'm doing it, which I guess, like, teaser, I'm considering taking part in the NES Big 20, the 17th, because of the games, and that would require some training on my part, not for a lot, like, a lot of the games I've loaded them up and I've been able to complete the objective without much difficulty. It's weaving that all together into a beautiful 20-game tapestry that I have a little bit of nerves about, and I don't know if I can commit to it yet. I'll just put it all on the table. Why the heck not? So while this is the week where I'm still deciding that, I mean, I have another NES flash cart coming in because I don't want to play it on my Japanese NES on my Japanese flash cart, as much as I am a big fan of it and I like it, it's old and it is starting to show some wear in the fact. I mean, I got it used in Taiwan 3 years ago. So, like, it was already well-loved before it came into my possession, and then was well-loved some more. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. 4 years ago, I got it Christmas 2019. I beat Ninja Gaiden on it. These are the stories that you got right now.
Nice.
But yeah, so, like, that's something that I'm toying with. But I hope to get through the book. I'm going to have some more time and some less responsibilities. And if I were a fish and I came across the hook with John dies at the end, I would be on your plate right now, covered in lemon and butter. That's what I gotta say. I'm hooked, baby.
Yeah. Nice.
So yes, Sejohn, I asked you to do something before this recording. Did you spend an hour in the Lost Levels?
Yeah, Dev, I didn't get very far.
That's
suck at that game.
Really not surprising. And that's not why I asked you to do it. First of all, who did you play as, Mario or Luigi?
I mean, I just stuck with Mario. Was I missing something?
No,
I'll be honest, I kind of assumed that they were just palette swaps. Are they not?
So, Super Mario Brothers 2 Japanese, herefore referred to as Super Mario Brothers 2. That's what we're talking about right now. The original Japanese sequel to Super Mario Brothers 2, is the first time that Mario and Luigi are constructed as different characters.
Okay.
Which is an important thing to note. It's where Luigi gets a lot of his movement tech going forward.
Sorry, I know that you were just trying to clarify this, but I'm already lost. Do you mean the reskinned game that we call Super Mario Brothers 2?
No. Super Mario Brothers 2, from this point on the show, is Super Mario Brothers 2 Japan. The release in that, which we know in America as the Lost Levels. I'm going to refer to it as Super Mario Brothers 2. Going forward. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the original sequel, not the reskin of Doki Doki Panic that was released in America as Super Mario Brothers 2. For the purposes,
which came out first, the Japanese,
one. The Lost Levels first, came out a year later. Like it's one of the faster turnarounds in games, because it was a lot of reuse of ideas that didn't make it into the original game. It's like, we're building this game, and then, wouldn't it be cool if there were, like, wind effects in the game? And they're like, can you have it done by the time that our deadline? No. Okay, so maybe we don't focus on trying to put wind mechanics in there. What if we were, like, dicks to the player? What do you mean? What if, like, you find a warp zone, and instead of going forward, it takes you back? Let's not do that in this first game. Let's give people like a chance that they can survive, right? So then that game was deemed too difficult. Super Mario Brothers 2 was deemed too difficult. So they reskinned another game, Doki Doki Panic, hereafter during this conversation referred to as Super Mario Brothers US. And in that one, you know, Luigi jumps higher and he's kind of more slippery than Mario, which is crazy because Mario's already kind of a slippery character to control. Avoiding Italian jokes. Sorry, but I had to because otherwise one of them would have come out. But it was Super Mario Brothers 2, released in 1986, where Mario still controlled like the Mario from Super Mario Brothers, but Luigi was given a higher jump and a longer time to break from a full run.
Okay.
But that does mean that playing as Luigi in Super Mario Brothers 2, a lot of the jumps that are, I'm just going to say it, unfair, become a little bit easier to manage. I myself have done full playthroughs of the game, World 1 through World 9, as both Mario and Luigi. And honestly, everybody's always like, you got to play as Luigi. The game's more fun as Luigi. I love this game as Mario. Because Mario is a character that I understand.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Like, I've put probably not hundreds of hours into the first Super Mario Brothers game. and subsequent Mario games where it's not exactly a copy-paste of the physics from the first game, but they're heavily inspired by that first game, if that makes sense. So when I first started playing it as Mario, I started to enjoy it, right? When I put aside the, like, there's no reason not to play this game as Luigi, I'm like, I want to try it as Mario, though. And then I'm like, oh, this is really good. I like playing this as Mario. But continue, Sejohn, because playing as Mario, I'm glad that you played as Mario.
So just playing as Mario, and I found myself, and here's the thing, is I remember playing a lot of Lost Worlds on the All-Stars version, but you said, and you know, last week when I mentioned that, you said it's not the same thing. Play this one. I was like, okay, and it sure as fuck isn't. I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's just a matter of my time with it made the one in All-Stars feel like I had a better handle on it than this one. But no, I mean, I played as Mario. I did not find any warp zones. I wasn't really looking for warp zones. I was just trying to like get through some stuff. But like I was hitting areas where like just I couldn't make jumps, or I was getting killed by the same baddie over and over again. I mean, there's not much more for me to say. I tried playing this game for an hour, and I'm glad I never have to touch it again.
So how far did you get? Where's the furthest you got into the game? If I had to guess, I'd say it's 2-2.
I think.
What? The fifth world? Nice job. Whoa.
No, fifth. Like, what? Like
fifth level. So 2-1.
5. Yeah. 2-1. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I got through. I got through a first world. And I started a second world, and I thought maybe I can call it, and realized that I had only been playing for like 20 minutes at that point. And I was already pissed off. And then I spent my next 40 minutes banging my head against 2-1.
Yeah, that's like 2-2 is kind of the like notorious level where there's.
I don't think I got to 2-2.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't even think I saw 2-2.
Yeah, well, I mean, so one of the reasons why when you're like, I've played it on the Mario All-Stars version, when I first did it, I built a new SNES controller. So then when I'm like, I want to test this out, I want to put it through its paces, I'm like, you know what I'm finally going to do is complete Super Mario All-Stars. So I've always been able to beat the SMB 1, USA, and 3. But Lost Levels, I've beaten Lost Levels one time. It was on the Super Mario Brothers DX cartridge for Game Boy Color. And that one, again, you can save after every level, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the real big difference between playing the original game and then playing any of its remakes. Because in All-Stars, you get to save after you beat every level. So you don't get to go back to the start of the world if you die. So it becomes a little bit less challenging because you're always starting at the level where you died. So you're kind of given the opportunity to learn better, if that makes sense.
I could see that in theory. It didn't feel that way, but yeah.
No, I mean it doesn't feel that way because the original, starting at the one of every world, it's just like I have to get all the way back to that to try it again. What the fuck? And I'll admit, like that's how I felt playing through the game. But then every time I got that little bit further, it was a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt from this game since. I'll say 9th grade. 9th grade is where, like, Super Mario Brothers and I, the first game, really started to have, like, a dialogue with one another. Because I beat the DX version on my Game Boy Color, and I'm like, I'd like to go back to the original game. And what I would do after school, before I started my homework, is go down into the basement, turn on the local radio station, and start playing Super Mario Brothers. Until my father got home, and then I would do homework until dinner time. So, like, that's like 2-3 hours of Super Mario Brothers every night that I was playing. And, like, I got down to a point where I could, like, beat the original game start to finish in 30 minutes. And I got very close to, like, that 5-minute golden number of using the warp zones to do it.
Right.
I think like the fastest I ever did it was like 6, and that was before literally all of the tech that has been released, where you slide through walls, you're clipping through things, or like imagine a bus stop, and you don't want to get frame ruled, and all those crazy things that people say about the first Super Mario Brothers. So playing it non-All-Stars Super Mario Brothers 2, I really like got to understand its language a little bit. And it's sort of why when we're talking about books and the way that they're written and how they're different with something like John Dies at the end, I'm like, well then let's get my whole like I want to challenge Sejohn to play the Lost Levels thing out of the way.
Yeah, I mean like there's so the jumping there's a mechanic specifically of jumping off of enemies in order to get longer distances, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is present in 1, but not necessary. It's not even present in 1.
It's a possibility in 1, but it was never an intended mechanic.
Right. Whereas, like, it feels like in this game, it just is a necessary skill to have, right? And that's when you start to get kind of into this Kaizo mindset. You start to understand why people build levels or ROM hacks and stuff nowadays that really push those envelopes, because Nintendo starts that. Like, this feels like this is just an intense ROM hack of the first game.
And in a lot of ways it is. I mean, even the story of this game is that you are in the parallel world to the Mushroom Kingdom of the first Super Mario Brothers. Like, that's what it says in the manual.
Right, yeah, and then there's, like, this weird stuff about how a lot of the stuff in this world carries back over to the old one, because, like this is the one where they introduce the idea that the mushrooms might be sentient, right?
No, that's the first game. Everything has been turned into blocks and things.
No.
Oh.
I mean, in this one, this is the one where, like, the mushrooms now have, like, eyes on them as they like roll around and stuff. Like, they really push a lot of stuff in this one about that exact story that ends up, like, carrying through. And, like, there's just two, we often talk about this where sequels in video games always kind of feel like 2 is the one that they always wanted to make, but they just didn't have the time or the understanding or the budget or something, mix of the 3 probably, the first time around. And this really kind of carries that a little bit. Is I feel like there's a lot going on in this game with that they wanted to be present in the first one, but as you said, part of it was probably not wanting to completely alienate audiences. Part of it was also because I think there's just some stuff that they weren't expecting, like the bounce, like the baddie bounce that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's a whole mix of stuff in this game that feels like stuff they had always wanted, and I can see how there's some stuff in this game that does carry over. I mean, the jumping off of bad guys to get more distance and stuff, like, that's become a staple of some really interesting moments in Mario games, both 3D and 2D, right? Like, there is definitely a lasting impression that this game leaves on Mario games. But at this point, and maybe this is just because I'm spoiled being, 30, 40 years later, but like that idea being that there are better versions of even this game now.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I would like to read the story of the game because I have it up, because it's very interesting how it's written. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is a different type of sequel to when we talk about something like Mega Man 2. Mega Man 2 really refines what was present in Mega Man to make it the best possible version of the game, right?
Of Mega Man, right? Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers 2 is not that for the Super Mario Brothers series. Super Mario Brothers 3 is that we've refined the game, we've made it, like, we've taken everything that worked in the first game and made it special. Super Mario Brothers 2, and you also need to think about the fact that, like, this was a Famicom Disk System exclusive game. Mm-hmm. And those, like, you would buy the one disc, right? And then you'd go to your local game store, you'd pop that disc in, you'd pay the price of a full game, and it would be copied to the disc. And then your decision is either keep this disc as that game forever, or later on down the line, have it rewritten as The Legend of Zelda or Metroid, right? It's almost like DLC for the first game, based on the nature of the fact that it was on the disc system.
Nice. Yeah.
So you do that, and you play the game, and the game is so, like, that 2-2 jump, right? You get to a point where the pit is just a bit too long for you to make, but there is a pipe in the air. So you're like, oh, if I can get up to that pipe, I could jump across this. And what you have to do is literally find hidden Kaizo blocks to form a staircase up to that. But while the first block is, you know, a little to the left of the pipe, the next block is a little to the left of that block. So you're expected to be like jumping backwards away from progress in order to unlock a staircase to move forward. And then there are things where, like, so many of these levels, I mean, they're introduced in the first game, like specifically World 4, the castle level there is a big maze, and unless you go through it in the proper order, right, like take the proper paths, it'll just repeat forever.
Right.
There are so many levels in Super Mario Brothers 2 that will just repeat forever unless you go down the proper pipe or you find the proper beanstalk to make progress.
And you're always going back to the beginning, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, you've gone back 2 rooms. Like, no, you've restarted.
Usually it loops around that way. 8-2, which is a kind of famous one because you need to find a beanstalk in order to climb up, and that's where the flag is. It takes you back to the midpoint of the level, but you have to go through a pretty difficult set of screens to get back to that point if you go all the way to the end. It also introduces like jumping over flagpoles, and you think, oh, that's going to be a reward. But one of the first times you can jump over the flagpole, because it's one of the green springs that gives you that extra bounce so that you're off the screen and you just kind of have to guess where your character is. Right. If you go over the flagpole with that, you find the warp zone back to World 1. And it is a punishment for doing that. And the game, usually if you take a pipe, right, because you want to be exploring pipes, because that more times than not is the way to move forward, is to find that specific pipe. Like, some of the pipes dump you out and you're just like, oh, you're at a dead end now. Like, you don't get to go forward from here. Yeah. You could jump into a pit, or you can let time run out. Or,
I was going to say, you basically soft lock yourself.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, you don't soft lock yourself because a lot of the times they give you the option to kill yourself. Like, even that one where if you go over the flagpole and you find the warp zone, there is a pit to kill yourself.
A soft lock and a hard lock is like a soft lock. You can just kill yourself.
You can get away from it.
You want. Right,
I guess.
But like a hard lock means that like the game is broken. You can't. You're fucked.
Well, yeah, right. Because the soft lock is the software cannot continue. A hard lock, resetting the software will. You don't have to reset the software. It's able to be broken within the software. Where a hard lock requires you going to the hardware. Blah. Sorry, I've never really considered the etymology of those two words. Right? Etymology is words, right? Entomology is bugs.
You're asking the wrong insect, buddy.
You're a jerk. I love you. Entomology.
Yeah, we have the technology.
Yeah. Entomology is insects, so etymology.
There is something about what's going on in Super Mario Brothers 2 that really does feel like this is Nintendo pushing their own limits in a way that we don't get to see very often, but they do learn from it. They don't ever push themselves. They don't do this enough anymore. Like, right? Like, I think that's the big thing that I'm walking away from this with. I wish that they would. They kind of did with Super Mario Brothers, and then they introduced the Super Mario Brothers U, and then Super Mario Brothers Luigi U, right?
Yeah.
Like where they do that whole thing. That was really cool. The remixing and all of that, and like you get some of this sort of stuff in Super Mario Brothers when you go to like Star Worlds that are kind of like harder versions of worlds you've already been to and stuff. There's a little bit here or there that they bring forward that means that like they have not completely written this game off, right? This is not something that they don't want to talk about. This is not the Star Wars Christmas special of the Nintendo verse, right? Like this is a thing that they are happy to draw from in some ways. I mean, we see that with All Stars, right? The fact that they even include any version of it in All Stars is like a huge acknowledgement of that. So like, I want to see them do it again. I want to see them go back and try and do stuff like this.
by all accounts, that seems to be what Wonder is going to be. And even taking it to the 3D plane, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is, according to a lot of people, much harder than the original Super Mario Galaxy. In fact, for a long time, I was kind of turned off from Super Mario Galaxy 2 because the discussion was, it's such a difficult game. And then when I finally played it, I'm like, well, it's not that difficult. Like, I don't know why I let people like scare me away from it. I
think the big thing that I remember about Galaxy 2 is that it was being called difficult because of camera mechanics, which I don't know if you remember, but at that time period was just like the death nail, like in every coffin. Is if you don't get your camera right in this 3D exploration world, it's not going to be worth our time. I mean, look at what happened with Epic Mickey, right? And actually, I have gone back and played Epic Mickey, and it's not that bad. Like, it's not good. I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody was wrong. No, the camera is atrocious, but it's not atrocious in a way that breaks the game, which is the way that people talk about it, right? Like, there are ways to get the camera where you need it to be to do it. You just need to be more conscious of it, right? Versus like something like we've famously, I think, trashed Ukulele, because there are just moments of that game where it is literally unplayable because your character needs to do stuff where like it's just off screen. Your camera just cannot see what it's supposed to see.
There's a wall between me and the cameras, so I'm just guessing what I'm trying to make you could do right now.
That can happen in Epic Mickey, but there are ways to manipulate and fix that, or at least like it's not hindering you. Like in Ukulele, you'd be like flying and that shit would happen. Anyway, like I feel like there's something about the ways in which people talked about Mario Galaxy 2 where it was getting hit with a lot of criticisms that just every game at that time was. And I think in retrospect, going back to it, that game is stellar, right? The other one that I also think about in this realm, is the little add-on that they did, Bowser's Fury, when they re-released 3D World, right? Yeah. Like, Bowser's Fury is this beautiful kind of like not quite a sequel to any particular game. Like the ways in which Bowser's Fury like works and plays feels very much like it comes from something like a Galaxy, or like a Odyssey had already been out, right?
Odyssey had already come out.
Yeah, it felt like it was just another world in Odyssey almost in some ways. But introduced a whole bunch of new stuff and like mixed stuff up and remixed stuff, and like it was really cool. It was a really cool thing. So I like it when Nintendo is willing to dip back into the well and get weird, right? I really appreciate that. And to that, I can kind of see why people are looking at Wonder in that way.
Yeah. I mean, at Galaxy 2, the thing that I would deem, like, I didn't even think about the camera being that, it asks a lot of you as a player to make progress. Where usually you'd need like 2 or 3 stars to open up the next world. There are times where it's like, if you haven't gotten every star up to this point, you go kick rocks.
Yeah.
That is why I'm like, oh, but I'm getting every star anyway. Like that never became a wall for me, but I could see people who are like, well, I'm going to do the stars that I know how to do. And in other Mario games, that has not been a problem. But there is that moment in Super Mario Galaxy 2 where perfection is asked of you as this weird sort of gatekeeping. I think it's that you need 16 stars to progress, and only 17 stars have been made available to you.
Yeah, so, I do remember that, and I think it's one of those things where I used to feel that even Mario 64 was too much for me in that regard. There are moments in Mario 64 where I was like, I don't have enough stars for this, and I don't feel like getting the stars that are left. And so, like, that's a lot of the reason why I've always struggled with 64. And then I played Mario Galaxy 2 and realized how good I had it in Mario 64.
Yeah. So, like, that's where I thought it came from, is that, like, it's making you play the game.
Definitely part of it. Yeah. Oh, 100%.
And, I mean, we haven't brought up what I think is one of the worst offenders in terms of, like, locking endgame behind tasks. Super Mario Sunshine, the fact that you need to get the first 6 stars in every level is kind of crazy to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like... Yeah,
well, because even they, what's so atrocious about that game in particular is even they kind of run out of steam on it. Like, they lock themselves into that rule, and then even they don't really have the material to back that up sometimes, because they don't want to make them so hard you can't get them to progress. but at the same time, like you can only go around and collect this many coins this many times in this fashion. Somebody wait, like they don't even have the gameplay variability in that to really justify forcing you down those rabbit holes. You know, having that stuff available because I really like collecting coins is very different than saying you need to go and collect these coins, because there's a carrot and stick aspect to that the balance is just way off on Sunshine, which is I think one of that game's many problems. As somebody that loves that game,
and,
I yeah.
And one of those things is like they didn't have enough there, so then the game becomes, the whole gimmick of this is that you have this water pack. But we've run out of ideas on things to do with that water pack.
Yeah. Well, that's why I pointed out the collecting coins stuff, is because that doesn't involve the pack at all, really.
No. But then I'm talking about the times where we're going to take the water pack away from you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just like
levels where they do
okay. Yeah. What?
Yeah, to be fair, that is one style of coin in every level. They do you enter a room and we take the pack away from you story.
Yeah.
But to your point, the fact that they force you into it.
Yeah.
You know, because if I liked those levels, I happen to actually like those moments.
Yeah, some of them are really fun. The one I think of specifically, the one where you're gonna get thrown by those fucking pinatas.
Oh yeah,
and it's like, you guys suck. Throw me where I want to go. You're supposed to throw me opposite the way that you're facing, and you just threw me forward. How did that happen? Sorry. But what we're talking about in every single one of these is kind of the follow-up to the game that hit big. Super Mario Brothers 2 Super Mario Brothers happens. Super Mario Brothers 2, let's push the envelope. Doesn't really work. Super Mario Brothers 3 happens. And Super Mario Bros. World, they release like very close to each other. They're kind of the same game, but one is for NES and one is for Super Nintendo. That's an argument that a lot of people would be upset that I just like presented, but it's kind of the truth.
I mean, it's something that Nintendo has always really liked to do with their hardware releases, is have a software that is new to the system, so everybody wants it on that new system, but they always back their ass up by having that one on the old system just to make sure they get those sales numbers. Like, it just becomes super egregious later on when you just see two versions of Twilight Princess.
But one of them is right-handed and one of them is left-handed.
Yeah, but but you know, it's one of those things where people will point to that and act like appalled at that, but then you say, "This isn't the first time they've done that." Not the first time they've done that,
guys. Right? Like, exactly. But then you look at the follow-up to Super Mario World, and that is Yoshi's Island, which is technically a Mario game because Super Mario World 2, but it's very different from what came before.
It has these weird elements of an overworld, but not the overworld you can, like, you know and love. And, like, there's also weird elements of these enemies, but different styles.
Yeah, and you interact. Yoshi interacts with things that he could eat in Super Mario World completely differently from in this game. Like, it's like trying to push the envelope, but then it ends up spinning off into its own genre that it's so different. And then you have Super Mario 64, which weirdly sets this, like, gold standard for 3D exploration platforming. And then you have Super Mario Sunshine, which is like, oh, this is like that, but kind of harder and weirder. And like, you guys tried to do something here. Galaxy to Galaxy 2, Odyssey. I mean, well, then you have 3D World. Like, it's this really interesting thing where like they have a crackerjack Mario, and then the follow-up is, hey, we tried to do something different, but like also what you already liked. And a lot of the times, those are the ones that don't hit as well.
I mean, you can talk about that even with all of their properties. I mean, Mario Maker, right? And the ways in which Mario Maker 2 really do all of this, right? And the same goes for Zelda. We've talked many times about the weird ways in which they follow up Zeldas with other different ones, and how unique it was to get something like a Tears of the Kingdom that was essentially a Breath of the Wild 2, because it's not the first time they've done direct sequels in that, but it's not often that they do, right? It's because they usually like to follow up their big hit with a little bit of a riskier move to try and move the needle. I mean, you know, in some ways it's just good business strategy. And then from a creative side, it's a great way to kind of make sure you're not going to completely blow up your entire business while also still trying to do new and exciting things. You know, people always want to accuse Nintendo of being behind the times. We do it here. I am one of the biggest, you know, like I will always give them a bunch of shit about not being up to speed with things like their internet, you know, capabilities and things like that. But at the same time, that pacing and that nature of let's wait until we've got the hit on our hands before we get weird for a while and then we'll go back to doing that, you know, like that has allowed them to live through things in a way that not every company in the gaming industry has been able to survive like they have, right?
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, on that same thing, there are other lessons that are learned from Super Mario Brothers 2, right? They're like, this game is too hard for Western audiences, so we're gonna reskin another game and release that as the sequel to Super Mario Brothers there. But then they realize that difficult games means more rentals, or that people will buy a game that they rented because they want to beat it, or this 20-minute game is now suddenly 2 hours long because of these moments where you have to bang your head against the wall. So in a weird way, Super Mario Brothers 2 is kind of the birth of what we now call Nintendo Hard, which is kind of insane. The fact that the same company that said, this game is too hard, it will alienate Western audiences, to, you need to make this game harder because we can't have them being able to beat it in a rental period.
If you think about the ways that people felt about Super Mario 2, or not Super, but Mario Brothers 2, the American release, which was the reskin of Doki Doki, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the ways in which people react to that being the sequel to Mario. They take a pretty big hit on the chin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those games that we all kind of love in retrospect because it didn't kill Mario. Like, imagine if they had never made another Mario game because of how poorly that one had kind of done. Yeah. Like, it was not a loved game at the time, and the response to it was not what they were wanting after the response to Mario, right?
Yeah. It's a weird thing, Mario. And I'm now going to read the story of Super Mario Bros. 2 because I think it's hilarious. And then we have one other thing related to what you were talking about Nintendo and the internet to discuss before we end this episode. So the story of Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, or Super Mario Bros. 2 Japan, is identical to the first game and is said to be set in a parallel world to it. The following text has been translated from the Japanese instruction booklet. One day, the peaceful kingdom where mushrooms live was invaded by the tribe of the huge turtle, Koopa, whom possessed powerful magic. Said magical power transformed all the quiet mushroom people into rocks, bricks, and horsetails, among other forms, and the mushroom kingdom fell into ruin. The only one who can undo the magic on the mushrooms and revive them is the Mushroom Kingdom's own Princess Peach. She is presently in the hands of King Koopa. Mario has stood up to defeat the Turtle Tribe, rescue Princess Peach, and rebuild the peaceful Mushroom Kingdom. The Mario in the TV is you! Only you can bring this adventure quest, open parenthesis, expedition, close parenthesis, to a conclusion.
I'm glad they put that expedition in there. I was going to wag my finger at them. Is horsetail a plant of some kind?
Horsetail is the trees that are in the thing that are two circles on top of each other.
Oh.
I don't know why they're called horsetails. It is a type of tree. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. No, I just wanted to check before I went down that path. Man, that's fucking wild. Mario, the Mario in the TV is you.
The Mario in the TV is you. Like, yep.
Doesn't that how Battletoads starts?
It's something like that. I don't know. But now, moving on to something that is coming out on Nintendo for the first time. Going back to John Dies at the End, also one of the reasons why I didn't have time to play this, to read the book, was because Brotato has grown on me like a fungus, you piece of shit, Sejohn.
I know, man.
Oh, it's gotten to me.
Game.
Yeah, it's very addictive, and that you can drop in and get back in. Very fun. But coming this Thursday, all right, we still get to shill a little bit. This is not sponsored content, just as a reminder. Vampire Survivors finally comes to Nintendo Switch. But with it comes co-op. And even though Sejohn and I are just Sejohn Sarwark and Devon Decker, we got our hands on a beta build of the co-op. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts on that, Sejohn.
Yeah, man. Sorry, I'm reading this article you sent me about
About
horsetail
horsetails?
and how it points out that it's actually a pretty big ingredient in the Paper Mario series, which I'm now remembering. You eat them. Well, I guess you eat the mushrooms too, and that's freaky and break the blocks. And the world of Mario is fucked up. Sorry.
It's
So let's
okay.
talk about a much happier, joyous world in Vampire Survivor.
Yeah. So I mean, we've talked about Vampire Survivors before on the show. It's kind of it's not like an idle game, but it's the way that they say it is that become the bullet hell because you become the thing that the enemies just died
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But the co-op, I mean, I'll let you share your thoughts first because I don't. I think I'll just
I
tilt the scale too
I
much.
think the co-op has really broken that game for me because I don't want to play it any other way now. Like we have as you mentioned, we have talked about Vampire Survivors before, and I've made it no secret that I am not nearly as in love with that game as you have become, right? And
Mhm.
it's not that I think that there's anything wrong with it. It's not that I don't think it doesn't deserve like the cultural like swelling of support that it's received and continues to receive. I think it's earned all of that. It is just not a game it is not a game that is clicking for me like it seems to be for Devon specifically and for a lot of people, right? There have been other games in this genre, in fact, that have clicked with me better. So like I have a hard time constantly coming back to it, like like literally playing it, like coming back to play it because I've got other games that I'm just enjoying more, both in that genre and not. So like I don't mind continuing to talk about it. I don't mind continuing to hear people loving that game and all that stuff. I am just so not in on some of it to the point that there's been a lot of stuff where like content has come out and I've poked at it, but I've never really completed or finished a lot of it. And now I feel like, man, now I kind of want to, but not because I feel the drive from the game itself, but because I want to hang out with people and just do like we did, spend 30 minutes just getting through some shit and like unlocking some stuff and all of that. That feels so much more entertaining and fun for me. They've made it that much sweeter despite the difficulties and the weirdness of some of the stuff and all this. Like now that there is this co-op option, I am so much more back on board than I have ever been with Vampire Survivors.
Yeah. As somebody who loves the game and who, whenever there's new content, it is basically I'm going to be unavailable until I complete all of the new unlockables and achievements that came with it.
On three different systems.
I'm three. Well, yeah. You know what are you going to do, Sejohn? What are you going to do? That's what's going to happen
I'm
when it
just
comes out
saying,
on Switch. It's like
I think that there is something to be said about somebody that does that on the PC and somebody that does that on the PC and their Xbox and their PlayStation and now Switch and
well, no, it's not that I did it on the PlayStation. Not on PlayStation yet. I did it on two separate PCs.
there
That's
we
what
go.
it was. So to the fact that like we played with my friend Claude yesterday. We were able to get the co-op going there. I was hanging out with him and Steam Remote Play, magical.
Works a
Like
dream, by the way. We did have one hiccup literally after the first moment Devin said, "Man, this thing's working real well, huh?" And then all of a sudden I got kicked somehow.
Yeah.
But we were able to correct it within like 5 minutes and we were back to what we were doing. Right?
honestly, I think that may have been some interference on our side.
Yeah, we did find out that there was another controller on the loose.
Yeah, Claude's son was playing with the keyboard, and we didn't realize that. So I think that's what might have kicked you.
Yeah.
Just full
See,
disclosure.
so even
there.
then, like the only real issue moment we had, we were able to resolve, and it turns out probably wasn't anything to do with actually like
Yeah.
the Steam share, right? It was
Yeah, and one of the things that they've even said about this co-op for Vampire Survivors is we built it very much taking into account Steam Remote Play. So hopefully, like these are the known issues that we have, which we did not come across any of. There's like 4 known issues that can happen, and actually you might have had one. Like it said remote play. You said you had like a bar up briefly.
not briefly. The
Okay.
second that I joined Remote Play, there was a thing, just the little menu bar that for anybody that's ever played Remote Play, it's informing you that you can take over the session if you hold down certain keys in order to like take over, which you know, why would I need to do that unless somebody was going to leave, right? Like then maybe.
Yeah.
But like it popped and never left. So I just had that overlay over my screen the entire time we were playing, and that was a bit of a bummer.
So that is one of the ones that they do talk about. So we did experience one of them.
And that only came about after our little back and forth of trying to figure out who had control.
Yeah. So I mean it works. It worked really well. But like, I don't know. All right, here's what I'm going to approach. I'm going to go from a completely different direction. I hate board games. Like, if I were going to be at a meeting and I had to say something interesting about myself, hi, I'm Devon Decker, and I hate board games, is probably what I would say, because I want all you board game people to leave me the frick alone. No offense. Everybody can love what they love. I'm just not a big fan of board games. That on the table, Devon Decker, not a fan of board games on the table. Let me tell you about my favorite board game. And that is Pandemic. I absolutely love Pandemic. And the reason why I love Pandemic is that it is basically the players of the game against the game. It is a co-op.
Devon, you're talking about the genre of tabletop board games that is called co-op.
Yes.
You like co-op games instead of competition games. There's an entire like genre of those out there.
Okay.
Do you play any other co-op games?
I've played other co-op games. I love Pandemic.
Like regularly. I mean,
no, not regularly. Now I have like Zach from over at Board with Friends, and now All the Nerdy Fun. I would always be up to play board games with Zach. Zach and I are very old friends, and I enjoy playing board games with Zach. That's just a thing that I do enjoy. But I can admit that, like, if I were asked by anybody besides Zach, it's kind of an uphill battle for me to do it. And that's because Zach has identified the types of games I enjoy, and that's why he invites me. Because of the co-op of it. I also like the Babylon 5, where the Cylons are from. Is that Battlestar Galactica? I like the Battlestar Galactica game. That is really fun because it's kind of like Among Us a little bit, like who's the Cylon and things like that.
Nice.
So that one worked for me too. But Pandemic really worked because it is essentially the four of us need to work together to defeat this game that is being randomly generated based on the cards we draw and things like that. I like that no two experiences are the same, things like that, right? So when you add co-op to something like Vampire Survivors, which is heavily RNG generated, while we were playing yesterday, all I could think of was playing Pandemic with people. Because the strategies that we had to employ in order to be successful, it was just so cool. The way that they have rebalanced this game for there being multiple players blows my mind away. Like it is clear
like I said,
that
it changed the game in a way that it made it a game I want to keep playing.
Yeah,
which the main game is not. I think there's a big issue nowadays in online multiplayer experiences across the board. Like if you look at something like a Borderlands or a Call of Duty or something in that regard, there's so much going on with the single player, even in the multiplayer version, that like literally Borderlands, you can just run off on your own. You can be grouped with a bunch of people, and then you can just fucking disappear, fuck off to the other side of the map and do something else entirely. And like.
Sejohn's never going to let me forget that I did that, by the way.
But like then you have games like Destiny where they really try and tell you that you really need to stick together and do your own thing, but then they need to account so much for random like people and skill levels and all that they can't let it depend too much on that either, right? Same goes for Apex Legends and stuff. You get on an online multiplayer experience, and how many times, if you're not with your friends, right? If you're going by yourself, how often do teammates just run off on their own? How often are people just doing their own fucking thing? So many of these experiences put you in this position where you can kind of just go off and do your thing, that it's been those rare online multiplayer experiences the last few years that have really forced teamwork in a way and forced conversation and forced togetherness, and I say forced, but that has like negative connotations to it. Like really kind of depends on
it requires it in a
stuff,
lot of ways.
And like what Vampire Survivors is doing is it's putting you onto a board for 30 minutes and putting you in a position where you need to be communicating with each other and you need to be on the same page and you need to be talking to one another about what's going on because things are happening so fast, things are escalating so quickly and in various ways. And like depending on what your certain goals are, because like when we jumped in, the first thing I asked you guys was like, what are we aiming for? What is the one thing we're hoping to accomplish with this? And you laid out that there were like three things that you wanted to get done, that if we played three characters in a particular way, we'd get it squared away. So like, okay, cool. So we know that. Now the next thing is, now that we're on the board, like how are we going to accomplish those things? Because there's 1,000 different ways you can do that in this game. And like having those conversations and keeping you going versus like as somebody that tried to get into Dota for a while and like people just kind of know what they're doing and they kind of depend on you to know what you're doing, and so that communication's just not happening. And part of the reason that communication's not happening is because there's not any real randomness going on. As much as there may be random stuff that happens, you can kind of clock in a game like Dota, like like if I stay in this lane, we're going to behave in this way, we're going to go after these kinds of baddies, like all of that stuff, that people get mechanical about it. Vampire Survivors does not let you get mechanical about fuck all because of the random nature and because of the ways in which things escalate. You can never kind of just depend on the game to behave in a way you expect it to. That's just not going to happen. Like that kind of thing is like it really did elevate the gaming experience by having other people for me to talk about it with. In a weird way, it is everything that I want from a multiplayer game, and I think that it's what I've been waiting for because it had everything I ever wanted in a multiplayer game without the multiplayer experience.
I'll agree. It is. So usually when I play that game, right, I am thinking through my build right from the start, right? I'm going to aim for this weapon. I'm going to make sure I get this relic. That's the conversation I'm having with myself. Introducing two other sentient voices into the conversation was really interesting because it is that decision of like, well, since Sejohn started with the garlic, like we should make sure that somebody else gets an area of attack, right? This is why Claude went for the Bible, right? So that he also could be protected that way. And then, I mean, I was screwed. I didn't have any way to like have a passive protective sort of thing, but I could rely on you guys. I could make sure that I was in your garlic circle so that I have that protection or that I'm following. Yeah.
You mentioned the idea that you go in with wanting a particular weapon, right? Which means that there are going to be times where you're just not going to be fully loaded. You're not going to have a full deck because you're waiting on a specific weapon. And having us there didn't stop you from doing that, right? Like you ended up more than any of us running around the longest with only one weapon out of your three possible ones, right?
Yeah.
Like meanwhile, I think I got loaded up immediately because you guys were just like, okay, we're gonna dump this on you because we're trying to do other specific things, and that was fine with me because my goal didn't have anything to do with my weapon system, right? Like it still allowed you to play in the ways that you wanted to play. It didn't hinder your play style in any way having us there, but it did allow for you to bounce ideas off of us, for you to talk about how you might try this, and so we could keep an eye out for that. Like the ways in which it didn't stop you from playing the way that you normally play is also interesting to me.
Yeah, it was cool to be like, the birds have never been evolved on this particular game. So I am going to try to get the birds because A, I know how to evolve them, and B, I know how much of a bear it is to evolve the frickin' birds. Mm-hmm. So, like, you guys handle that stuff. I'm going to be passing or skipping or banishing weapons so that the pool leaves it no other chance than to give me the birds so we can fulfill this one specific requirement. And it was cool because your guy, since you got like the item that increases your area, it's like, well, then get the axes. And then when you got the axes to evolve into the scythes and you're just like, I am become death, call me Poe. Like, it was awesome. Because it's like, yeah, I'm going to stay near Sejohn because Sejohn's going to keep me alive.
Yeah, well, and in a weird way, like, for me, for some people, having all of that conversation in their own head is fun and part of the game. But I think for me, the part of the reason why Vampire Survivors was such a bear compared to something like Brotato or Bounty of One is I can't keep track of all those systems at once. I can, but at some point it stops being fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm here to relax and play a video game, that's just not what I want to do. Unloading some of those mechanical like concepts and those ideas, like the fact that I had somebody there like you that I could say, okay, I think I remember what I need to evolve this, but can you verify that for me so that I don't have to pause this game, look through the thing, figure that out, memorize it for later. I suddenly not having that like meta like completely opened up the fun for me. Having other people there just say like I think that if we try this, this might work. And even if I wasn't right, if somebody's like no, that it's better if we do this, or it's better if this person gets that instead because of A, B, or C, like okay, cool. Like the not having to keep that all in my own head was such a relief, and like made the game that much more enjoyable.
What weirdly made it enjoyable for me is that I've paid for the 2 DLCs. So in addition to the base, let's say conservatively 30 weapons and their combinations, I had an additional 18 that were like floating around in my mind. And to like shut myself off from like, no, we're not ever going to get that item. Please don't even think about it, Devon. Was so like, it, like you said, it was relaxing. It was relaxing to be like, okay, nobody needs to get like a specific combination of relics in order to evolve this weapon, because that weapon's just never going to happen.
Well, and I know exactly what you're talking about there, not because of Vampire Survivors, but this is a very similar system to Necrodancer, Curse of the Necrodancer, another one of my favorite games of all time. But interesting that it also uses this kind of random weapon system and the ways in which you can kind of stack power-ups and weapons in order to do more powerful things and stuff like that. And in that game has one of my favorite banishment systems, like so that you can curate what's going to be in that random pile, so that even though it is still random, you have some semblance of control, and that little taste gives you such an illusion of control that you feel so much better than just leaving it up to the RNG gods, right? And so I adore that system in Necrodancer, and so like thinking about it in that way now for this is awesome, and like is really enjoyable, and really kind of excites me to go back to this again in a way that when this was just a one-player experience, I couldn't even dare to try and think about this game in this way, because it was just way too overwhelming. And there is something to be said for too much content, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the overwhelming nature of this game is completely alleviated now by the idea that I don't always have to keep this shit in mind. I can just get in with a group that likes playing this game, and we can just have fun.
The crazy thing that you say about that, like there's such a thing as too much content, they themselves in Vampire Survivors understand that, in the fact that the latest power up you can purchase in the store with the gold that you're getting is the ability to seal away certain pieces of content within the game. So that like there was a moment, right? The Shadow Pinion came up, and that is to me one of the worst weapons in the game. And I'm sure there are some people who enjoy it, but it is one of the only weapons that only fires when you stop walking. So you have to like think about, I'll walk until it's charged up to what I want, and then I let go. And then like based on all of our builds that we were shooting for, I'm like, this is going to be awful for what we're trying to get done. I'm just going to banish it. You can do that now from the beginning so that it's not even in the pool. You can curate that game so that only the weapons you want are what's going to show up, based upon those 20 seals you can use to make sure they don't show up, which is really cool to me. I'm not gonna lie. Like they've done a lot to that game to put in too much content, but then they've also found ways to make it so you can curate that content.
Well, and I will say that when I say there's such a thing as too much content, I think the real takeaway from that should be more that it's up to the designer. It's not up to a developer or designer to not include shit. I'm not saying cut content because this is too much. you need to learn to curate it in a way that does not overwhelm your user. If you feel that everything that is in this game needs to be there, that's cool. I'm on board for that. But then it's up to you to figure out a way to get that information to me as the player in a way that doesn't make me feel like this is too much, right? Because like we're also sitting here currently in the shadow of Baldur's Gate 3, which we are going to have a conversation about eventually. Because of the ways I mean, it just toppled Tears of the Kingdom for best rated game of the year, which is insane that happened considering where Tears of the Kingdom was. Right?
Yeah, like
right. Yeah, so we will have to, but one of the biggest things about that game is that there is some reported like absurd number of like 18,000 possible endings or some bullshit like that, like some crazy number of possibilities of the amount of content that is supposedly in this game, because like people are like losing their minds over the fact that like no two people seem to be playing the same game while they're all playing Baldur's Gate 3, and like that the idea that there's this much content available in this game, and yet everybody's still also saying that they're finding it so easy to engage with is like mind-blowing, right? And like that idea that with Vampire Survivors, I felt that there was too much content for me, way too overwhelming for me to approach, to the point where it was not fun or it was not cool anymore how much was there. Like I was just kind of I was done with my experiences with Vampire Survivors. For all of that pressure, for that veil to be lifted by the introduction of just, hey, you can now do this with some friends, is like the essential nature. It proves why something like multiplayer, why something like playing video games with your friends and not just a singular experience, like the value of that. And like that is really cool, you know. And this is not the first time that we've had conversations like this in the last couple of years. Like this is kind of a lot of the same gushing that we did over Turtles, right? Over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like it is that idea that we are slowly starting to come back to developers and publishers understanding what we want from multiplayer content, because so much of the multiplayer content over the last like 20 years has been swallowed by the money-making bullshit of it all.
Yeah.
You know, selling you map packs in Call of Duty, selling you weapons and skins and all of that shit for Apex, and like there's the ways in which that side of the capitalist bullshit side of the industry has just kind of dictated what multiplayer was going to be for the last 20 years has sucked, because like all I've wanted is this kind of experience, to just be able to get on with my friends for 30 minutes, have this kind of fun in a game that I otherwise don't really touch, and then walk away, and that's okay. That game is still doing gangbusters, so they don't feel this need to pinch pennies and wring every penny out of me and all of this shit, you know?
Yeah. I am curious to see what the DLC will do for Shredder's Revenge. That is something that we definitely have a watch on. The Portal, I don't remember the full name of it, but essentially it kind of looks like the Mr. X mode that they added to Streets of Rage, which makes sense because they're both by Dotemu. And that was new life into Streets of Rage 4 for me, with the Mr. X thing, where it was like wave-based survival, and at the end of every level you picked a buff that you would then take forward into the beat-em-up, right? I mean, that's kind of what I was hoping Double Dragon Gaiden, I can't believe I got another fucking shout-out on this, but like I could feel it coming out of my mouth, would have like taken that to the next level when they called it themselves a roguelite. So instead of just singular rooms where you're fighting that type of thing, they were able to work it into a narrative structure. And as we know,
with the whole portal system, I think we're going to see some of that in this.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, is that there's the portal system, but then it also appears as if the crystals that you're collecting then take you to a different type of era, which makes sense because you're going through portals, and then like going from the feudal Japan that it's like has been all the images to the 8-bit world. There's then going to be different stipulations, enemies, and things that are applied to your goals to continue moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see what kind of insanity that brings, right?
Yeah.
But
But again,
yeah.
we didn't have a date for it. Every time, and I feel terrible doing this, but every time like new content comes out, my first thought is to like go to the comments and see if there's a date yet. And it is, and I'm not alone. Everybody is like, just give us a date for when this is, or give us the time to expect it. Like available soon does not help me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is not an excuse. Like, we need to figure out ways that this doesn't have to be part of the math. But, like, unfortunately, sometimes it's like, hey, we need money to keep this going. And, like, if we don't put, like, a trailer together, we're not going to get that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate that we need a date on it, but I also understand that they are probably at a point where I think that they are trying to do this right, considering how good the first game, the main game, was received. They're trying really hard to not fuck this one up, but it's also, it feels like they don't want to rush it, and I really appreciate that. So I appreciate a trailer coming out to reignite interest and keep people talking and keep investors, keep the money flowing. I am not surprised we don't have a date yet, and I don't want them to feel that pressure to have to put a date.
To then have to hit a date, especially with like, look what happened with River City Girls 2, which I don't mind bringing that up, because them adhering to the date once they gave the date, they released a game that wasn't completed for 6 months.
Right.
Like that's just a fact. So, but it is still, I can live in that duality of like, I want them to make sure that they put this through its paces, so when it releases, it is as successful, if not more successful, than the original product that it is enhancing. On the other hand, I want it now. Like, I do. I want to play it right now. It's Dimension Shell Shock, by the way, just to make sure I'm giving the proper name to it. But then to go back to, so for Vampire Survivors, it is finally coming to probably the most accessible system for most people right now in the country as it comes to Nintendo Switch. It is still just a $5 game. And the other thing to keep in touch is that everything, co-op is included from the beginning. The DLC is just going to be additional levels that you can play with people. And the first one, the Moonspell DLC, that is just a level and some new characters. Lake of Foscari, the second DLC, actually has a weird sort of narrative baked into it. So if you're looking at the two of them, understand that they're not the same type of package for that $1.99 price tag. But again, there's so much content in the base game that, like, just get the base game on Thursday if it's something you're interested in. And with the co-op, it is...
I can't believe I am interested in buying it day one now. I always figured I would eventually pick it up. I mean, it's $5 and it's a fun game. Like, for all the shit I am talking about it, like, I still enjoy playing it. So why would I not have a fun game that's available to me on the go on my Switch for $5, right? But now it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, we need to get this, because, like, I'm excited to play this again with you, and I'm excited to play this with other people. You know, maybe we can get Zach and Dale in on it, right? And, like, that would be great.
Have a great time. I mean, the only other person I've done a co-op session with so far was Dale. And that was interesting because we did it on my base Steam game, the one that's like in the cloud and everything. And so I disabled a bunch of stuff that does not fit my playstyle. Specifically the cross weapon. I don't like the cross weapon because once you evolve it, it becomes weaker. Like, that's my biggest issue with it. I don't like that it becomes weaker once it's evolved. And I've done the math to figure that out. But then Dale picks Croichi to play as, and I'm like, oh, she's not going to be able to evolve her weapon, and I feel bad about that. And not even just evolve it, like, it's just going to be level 1 because they'll never show up because I've blocked it out. So, and we still ended up, we almost killed Death that first time through. And that's because, like, Dale is another person who understood that game, but then once she, like, rolled credits on it, she's like, I'm never going to touch this again. But this morning when I woke up, she's like, after you record, we can do another Vampire Survivors, right? Like, the co-op really is introducing something new and different. But then I do want to just disclaimer the whole thing. The other reason why I like Vampire Survivors is the game is vague as hell. It does not tell you anything. The big difference between something like Brotato and Vampire Survivors is Brotato kind of spells everything out for you before you pick the weapons up. This weapon does this much damage. This is its range. This is its like special trait. This is how it can be modified with other skills and other, you know, stats that you have.
Yeah, no, this is literally what I said on the episode 2 weeks ago, last week, about why I like Potato over Vampire Survivors. It's literally this exact thing you're talking about. Yeah. But yeah, go on.
No, I want to make sure. Is that but if people are going to pick up Vampire Survivors based on me, understand that when you start that game, you have one character available to you and his weapon. It requires playing to unlock a bunch of the weapons and relics and characters.
And I would say, even then, it's not even always clear what you did to unlock a character or do a thing. So also, it's not like it's like a once it happens, it'll all make sense. No, you may be ready to do some research eventually.
Yeah.
I think that you can have plenty of fun for a long time without ever having to go online about Vampire Survivors, but it is the kind of game where at some point you are going to wonder, should I just look this up? And I'm going to tell you right now, explicit permission from the SAG report, feel free to just look it up. And then once you do, then it's going to become a whole other game of you basically having the wiki up beside you the entire time. Or you become Devon and you just have the wiki in your head running the entire time like a fucking mind palace.
Yeah. What I will say is, before you go online, because I will also sign off on feel free to go online if you're like trying to figure something out and you just can't do it. There is the unlockables menu, and that unlockables menu honestly is like a scavenger hunt list of the things that you're supposed to do and how things can be accomplished.
I will put it this way. I go to the list a lot as somebody trying to figure out what I should be doing. I go online a lot to figure out how the best way to go about it sometimes.
Yeah.
Because like there are ways that there are things in that list that it just tells you like, you know, do this with this character and that's great. But then there's this thing where it's like get to level 80 and it's just like how I can't get this character past the first 10 minutes in certain ways. Like how am I supposed to do that? Like and that is the stuff. So if you're wondering like where you should aim, that list is great. But if you're trying to figure out like some specific shit about exactly how to accomplish a specific thing, don't hesitate to just go online and figure out like where on a map a character is, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like it is. But understand that the manual that we would have gotten in games in the 80s is essentially that unlockables list. So while I say that Vampire Survivors is vague as hell, it also does have this one thing that tries to help. But it does try to help as if it's the 60s Riddler.
And I think it's important to note that this is all it feels very intentional, very purposeful.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I think it's the design.
And that's like a criticism. Like, they went out of their way to make it so that you're constantly being rewarded. So you always feel like you're accomplishing something. But if you start to get enough into the game where you want to accomplish specific things, you have to put some work in. And again, I think that's part of the game.
And they can let me know if this is completely wrong for them. But I would say, knowing that Dale and Claude both rolled credits on this game and then never went back to it again, it's because that reward system started to dry up for them. And they weren't interested in looking up that Wikipedia. That said, both of them have been reinvigorated by the co-op, because I have firsthand experience there. And also got to the end of the game. Like, the game engaged them enough to keep playing until they saw credits.
Yeah.
So, it's just stuff to keep in mind. Yep. All right. Which now brings us to the task portion of this. And we're already a little long in the tooth, so we can go quick with this. Sejohn, what task do you have for me to hopefully accomplish this week?
I got a much easier one, and a much more fun and much more interesting one for us to talk about. Devon, how familiar are you with the YouTube like meme, how it's actually made? It's been going for about 5 or 6 years.
I don't know anything about it.
Okay, I will just to kind of explain the hook just a little bit. A dude takes videos of episodes of how it's made, and specifically sections like the 5 to 10 minute sections about like, you know, this is how they make Hershey's Kisses, this is how they make, you know, Mrs. Fields cookies, that kind of thing. He takes those videos and then redoes the narrative over them, and the name of the series is How It's Actually Made. And this is such a popular series. He's about to hit 100 episodes on it. He's done 95. He's the YouTuber's name is Hugbees, Huggbees. But he's been doing it now for almost a decade, and is about to hit 100 episodes of this particular bit. He has other bits as well. And I'll be honest, I don't have a love for this YouTuber. So like, if you watch them and you're like, I hate this, like, that's totally fun. Like I want to address this thing that is about to hit 100 episodes that has been going for this amount of time on YouTube.
Cool. So like, is there like a number of episodes you think I should watch, or are there specific episodes you want me to watch? Or
there's not specific episodes. I think that like watching one or two will give you the point. I'd be curious if you watch beyond that, but you know, watch a good handful. Watch at least 3. Let's put it that way.
All right, well, I'll go 4 because I'm a big fan of the 4-episode test. So I'll even give you one for free.
There you go. Yeah, like I personally watch them all the time. So like, I am under the impression that if you watch 1 or 2, you'll probably watch 3 or 4 anyway. So like,
right.
So like, but
I understand, but you know, it's tasks and stuff. But Hugbees is like my favorite phrase from a particular show starring Paul Rudd that was produced by Steven Spielberg. Realizing I have to get vague about it because of certain things. So I'm a big fan of that term. So let's roll it out. Mine, I loved talking about Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. And what I've actually loved even more is all of the additional conversations that I have had with people who have listened to that episode. In fact, upon arrival to Claude's yesterday, we were both coming from the breakfast restaurant that we started the day at. And the Luke Combs version came on, and it was the first time that Claude's wife had ever heard it. And she had some thoughts, and Claude said, I'm not going to engage you because Devon is the one who should get to hear these firsthand thoughts from you. And we had a lovely discussion about it that, like, even went further than it. So here's the thing that I'm bringing to the table. Sejohn, I would like you to find your 3 favorite covers that are by the same artist. Now, that might seem a little strange in how I'm wording it, and I've been trying to figure out a better way to phrase it since it came to me, but, like, if a band releases a live recording of a song, it is generally very different from the studio recording of that song. You also have artists like Taylor Swift, or Bowling for Soup, that's a weird like dichotomy that represents, who Bowling for Soup, when they do their greatest hit CDs, they record a new version of the song. Taylor Swift, because of legal reasons and wanting to own her intellectual property, has done her version of songs that appeared on original albums.
Of albums. She has done
her version of albums.
Yeah.
So that she can own that version of it. And, you know, there's some change, or there's some difference in the production and how it's presented. So it's a phenomenon that I have been like kind of interested in. Specifically, I think that there's a reason why you don't really hear the album version of Old Apartment, because the version that the Bare Naked Ladies put on Rock Spectacle is the one that was on the radio more, and it's the one that people think of. So 3 songs from you where you enjoy the cover version of the original studio album recording. Doesn't need to be the same artist, just 3 that speak to you.
So just 3 cover songs I like?
Well, not cover songs. It needs to be the same artist doing their work.
Doing their own work.
Yeah. So like, She's Got Away from the Russia concert with Billy Joel.
That's actually really interesting. I was going to recommend a particular Offspring album that is a lot of this sort of stuff, but I opted for the YouTube one because we were just talking about YouTube earlier. But we might get to talk about the Offspring anyway.
I love talking about the Offspring.
We'll see if that's the album. We'll see if that's what I choose, because there's some good ones out there.
It's a really interesting thing, and something that I've been, because my Spotify is cultivated to offer me a lot of covers of songs. It also offers me alternative takes or recordings of songs by the same artist.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
don't want
very
to.
interesting.
I don't want to cannibalize material for next week. All I will say is be ready to talk about LimeWire and Napster.
Oh, of course. Love it.
Right.
And I don't want to.
Yeah.
I will say this: the best Offspring conversation I ever had was with an English teacher who never taught me in the hallway, because she's like, "You're the only person in this school who will appreciate what I'm about to say." And that's if the Offspring comes up, baby. So no pressure, Sejohn.
Yeah, no, it's that now it can't be the Offspring. That's gonna be the beauty of it, because now I have to find somebody else entirely. But don't worry, it's gonna be good.
It's gonna happen. Don't worry. All right, cool. So thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Say Report. If you have anything that you want to contribute, if you want to let us know about anything that we've said, if you're going to download Vampire Survivors and you want to tell us like how you felt about it, the best way to get in touch with us right now is to send us an email to thesayreport@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And that's just because I still don't know how to feel about X Twitter. Like I don't know how to feel about it. So, like, communicate with us directly. And I promise that Sejohn and I are considering other alternatives to the old shoot us a tweet on Twitter that we used to end the episodes. But for now, if you have something to say, or even if you just got this far into the episode and want to drop us a hello, the best place to do that is thesayreport@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
All right. Will, why don't you bring us home?
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.